G'day Gladys and Potties, welcome to another LNL. For me, God is a word given to absence of information, of comprehension, of answers. The idea of God grows in the way a balloon grows, a membrane inflated by ignorance. And 22 years ago to the day, I tried to puncture that balloon with my favourite book. It was the best thing I'd done and remains the best thing I've done, I'm afraid, decades later. It was hubristically entitled Atoms versus God, and on the cover there was a sort of a pastiche of the Sistine ceiling with God reaching over to jumpstart Adam with a stretched forefinger. Adam becomes Adams on the cover, and I tweak God's finger. Well, he got his own back. He got his own back because as I was flying into Rome airport about a month later, it was a pretty heavy storm, and the pilot told us that we were just over the Vatican. And at that very second, all the lights in the plane disappeared. The plane shook and shuddered because we'd been struck by lightning. The pilot said, "Never strikes twice in the same place." Wallop, another one. And we found later that both lightning strikes had occurred on the plane's shiny skin next to my seat. Now, apart from that, the book didn't do much damage to God, I'm afraid. There were lots of hate mail, and they railed against me from a plethora of pulpits. But it was a lonely time for atheism. The tide, however, seems to be turning. At the moment, there's a lot of atheist manifestos, including one of that title, the Atheist Manifesto, The Case Against Christianity, Judaism and Islam by Michael Onfray, Letter to a Christian Nation, a challenge to faith by Sam Harris, famously The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, a book that's just been published out of Melbourne, Against Religion, Tomas Pataki, and we'll be discussing that a little later. But my favourite of the current pile of books against God is called God Is Not Great, energetically subtitled How Religion Poisons Everything. I read it in galley form about a month ago and was thrilled to the back teeth. I think it's the best of the bunch and far more passionate and powerful than Dawkins' book. In fact, Dawkins seems quite temperate and polite when you compare it to God Is Not Great. But how could it be otherwise? Because the author is Christopher Hitchens. I welcome him to the program and I warn him against flying over the Vatican for the next couple of months. How are you, Christopher?
So far unscathed, old mate. Not bad. And thank you for those warm remarks.
Well, it's great fun.
Though I must say, I should actually begin by saying, just to get out of the way, I do think that the work of senior profs, whose coattails I'm hardly qualified to touch, such as Professor Darrell Dennett and Dawkins and Sam Harris, who's a real serious student of neuroscience and other things. I think that the zeitgeist moment you mentioned might have taken a little longer to crystallize, but I do think you are right. All over the world, there are a lot of people who just had it with religious and clerical bullying and intimidation, whether it's that you can't publish your own cartoons in Denmark, or whether it's the utter levelling of Iraqi society by the parties of God, or whether it's the attempt to teach idiocy under the name of intelligent design to American children. Whatever it might be, or a pope who says that, okay, AIDS may be bad, but condoms are worse. Enough already, to put it shortly.
Enough already. It's some millennia down the track.
While on that subject, enough with nutbag settlers on the West Bank who think that by violating other people's property and livelihood, they can bring on the Messiah and Armageddon and have a lot of Christian friends, as well as a lot of enthusiastic Muslim enemies on whom they have a symbiotic effect. It's really, everywhere you look, really the measure of how well civilization is doing is how badly religion is doing, and we have to, I think, accept that this is indeed the arc.
I think it's significant that I've just been opening the mail while I was awaiting your arrival.
Well, that's what you do when we're talking. I've often wondered.
And I've
pictured worse.
I've got an anonymous letter. The very letter I've just opened says, "Dear Philip, it would be easier for you if you talked to God." Now, that's an amazing thing, isn't it? That's Jungian synchronicity.
But one gets letters like this from people who, I presume, are if you like, sincere. But here's what it is with me. I don't know what they mean by this at all. Now, if you take a scholar, historian, like Gary Wills, for example, some of your listeners will know what I mean.
I think he's terrific.
He's written tremendous books about religion in America, actually, about great books about Nixon, Kennedy, and Reagan, a sort of trifecta, you might say, about the Constitution, about St. Augustine. But there I pause, because I've learned, even when disagreeing with him, from so much of his work. Reading on St. Augustine, he starts on about the refulgence of love and the numinousness of the mystique. What is this? White noise to me. White noise. It has no meaning of any kind. People say, if only I would accept Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, or would only acknowledge that the last words were spoken by the Archangel Gabriel to an illiterate merchant in the Arabian Peninsula. If only I would do this, I could know bliss. With most people, I know what I'm disagreeing with. The shortcoming, therefore, must either be in me, I'm willing to admit it, or in them. Either they're talking completely unintelligible tripe, or they know of a language that is unintelligible to you and me.
I've been a fan of Will's for many years, ever since I read Nixon Agonostes when I was 15 or 16. I thought it was a masterpiece.
It's a brilliant book, yeah.
And yet again and again, like you, I'm brought up, affronted by his meanderings on religious matters, although he was damn good on the Vatican's difficulties with the pedophiles. I've got
or as I phrase it in my book, no child's behind left, as it would be, I suppose, phrased in the Latin form. I also have a slight disagreement with Wills. He moved from right to left in a funny way, having started off as a very conservative Catholic working for William Buckley. He was very impressed by the sort of black version of liberation theology in the 60s, as who was not. I mean, who wasn't stirred by Dr. King. I have a long section on this in my book, but if Dr. King had really been quoting Exodus and talking about let my people go and let's go to the promised land, if he was really quoting it, he'd be saying, and let's kill everyone we meet along the way.
Yes, there's a lot of ethnic cleansing.
It's exactly because it isn't Christian that it is honorable and believable. He doesn't say you can't get there unless you saw off the end of your... Am I allowed to say this?
Absolutely, I insist.
Thing, your dick. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say you have to slaughter all the Amalekites. He doesn't have to say you have to enslave and kill all the non-Jewish tribes you meet along the route. I mean, it's exactly because it isn't in tune with its metaphors that it's impressive, and I think that deserves to be said, don't you?
Absolutely.
Because you meet a lot of soft-centered religious leftists, saturated with piety, who talk equal nonsense, again with that same sense of entitlement, and
there's been another fashion lately, as well as the irreligious finally forming a mighty army. And that's been those that insist that science and religion can cohabit, indeed do very well together. And we've had a number of them on the program. Almost all the Templeton Prize winners have appeared.
Yes.
I am very polite to them. I listen to what they have to say. But that's another thing which seems to me absolute waffle, that the religious versus the scientific mindsets are anathema. And that's one of the great thrusts, of course, of Dawkins' book, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is. And I would say of his book, which I greatly revere, as of Daniel Dennett's, that these are people who operate at an extraordinarily high level of learning and study that I can only borrow from and emulate. But that I think that the case against belief in God was absolutely complete long before Darwin and long before Einstein. It's done by Democritus and Epicurus in Greece long before monotheism, as a matter of fact. There isn't a God who takes an interest in our daily lives, and it's selfish and stupid and self-centered of us to believe that there is. We cannot, though, scientifically demonstrate that there is no God, any more than they can that there is one. I mean, the cleverest theologians never been able to do that, and never will. It's not necessary to do so. All you have to do is say, those who claim they do know and can know everything about the cosmos are excluded by definition. Because they not only claim to know something that can't be known, namely that there was a creator, which would only, as you know, raise the question of who created that creator, But they go further than that. They say, I know this